So we are continuing our series this morning on a vision of glory, and this week we're picking it up in Ezekiel chapter 1. So if you've got a Bible or your Bible on your phone, why don't you have that open in front of you? It will help you if you've got it there in front of you. But I'm going to read that chapter as we begin, and then I'll pray. In my 13th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day, whilst I was among the exiles by the river Kibar, the heavens were opened and I saw visions of God. On the 5th of the month, it was the 5th year in the exile of King Jehoiakim, the word of the Lord came to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, by the river Kibar, in the land of the Babylonians. There the hand of the Lord was on him. I looked, and I saw a violent storm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning and surrounded by brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal, and in the fire was what looked like 4 living creatures. In appearance, their form was human, but each of them had 4 faces and 4 wings. Their legs were straight, their feet were like those of a calf and gleaming like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands. All 4 of them had faces and wings, and the wings of one touched the wings of another. Each of one went straight ahead. They did not turn as they moved. Their faces looked like this. Each of the 4 had the face of a human being on the right-hand side. Each one had a face of a lion, and on the left-hand side, the face of an ox. Each also had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. They each had 2 wings spreading out upwards, and each wing touching that of the creature on either side, and each had 2 other wings covering its body. Each one went straight ahead wherever the Spirit would go. They would go without turning as they went. With the appearance of the living creatures was like burning coals of fire, or like torches. Fire moved back and forth among the creatures. It was bright, and lightning flashed out of it. The creatures sped back and forth like flashes of lightning. As I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the ground beside each creature with its 4 faces. This is what the appearance and structure of the wheels was like. They sparkled like topaz, and all 4 looked alike. Each appeared to be made like a wheel with an intersecting wheel. As they moved, they would go in any one of the 4 directions the living creatures faced. The wheels did not change direction as the creatures went. Their rims were high and awesome, and all 4 rims were full of eyes all around. I'm going to ask you to draw this in a minute, by the way, just so that you know. When the living creatures moved, the wheels beside them moved, and when the living creatures rose from the ground, the wheels also rose. Wherever the Spirit would go, they would go, and the wheels would rise among them, because the Spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. When the creatures moved, they also moved, and when the creatures stood still, they also stood still. And when the creatures rose from the ground, the wheels rose along with them, because the Spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Spread out and above the heads of the living creatures was what looked like something like a vault, sparkling like crystal and awesome. And under the vault their wings were stretched out one towards the other, and each had 2 wings covering its body. When the creatures moved, I heard the sound of their wings like the roar of rushing waters, like the voice of the Almighty, like the tumult of an army. When they stood still, they lowered their wings, and then there came a voice from above the vault over their heads, and they stood with lowered wings. And above their vault over their heads was what looked like a throne of lapis lazuli. High above on the throne was a figure like that of a man. And I saw from what appeared to be his waist upwards, looked like glowing metal, as if full of fire, and from there down he looked like fire, and brilliant light surrounding him, like the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the radiance around him. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord, and when I saw it, I fell face down, and I heard the voice of one speaking. Wow, what a picture. As I said, you'll have to draw that later, and I'll mark them out of 10. So we're in the middle of this this series we've titled A Vision of Glory, and that word glory throughout the scriptures is used both as a noun and a verb. So we are to do glory, we give glory, we reflect glory. It is a doing word, but it is also a noun in that the glory is something to do with who God is. We've used this kind of definition from Bob Sorge. The glory is the reality of God entering the human sphere. It's the reality of God entering the human sphere. And that's why actually our church vision prayer that we've just prayed is all about praying that we would see the presence of God in his church and in this city, that we would be, as we're for Jesus, for Lancaster, it is in one sense all about his glory. That we would see the reality of God entering into the human sphere. Now, what does that mean? What is the reality of God? Well, we saw week 1, Exodus chapter 33, that when Moses asks to see the glory of God, God says, I'm going to make all of my goodness pass in front of you because his glory is his character. And so the glory of God is infinite joy, infinite love, infinite goodness. Glory is the revealing of these things because that is who God is. And so as he enters into reality, what is entering into reality is goodness itself and love itself and joy itself and peace itself. And then we saw a couple of weeks ago in Eden, when Adam and Eve are first created, they're in this place where they are living in this beautiful garden where, as we described it using Tim Mackey, some of you might know Tim Mackey from the Bible Project, he describes it like this. God's space and human space are in the same space. They're existing together. So the fullness of God has entered the human sphere in the garden, and they're living, and we looked at how in that space they're given this, as Tolkien calls it, they are to be sub-creators under God, creating something beautiful out of the chaos and the darkness in that place of glory with God. But then last week we saw how Adam and Eve, deceived by the serpent, chose to know good and evil. They chose to become the arbitrators of moral truth rather than looking to God. And so instead of, we use this illustration, instead of like a planet orbiting the sun with it getting all of its life from the glory and everything coming from it, it's like they choose to leave the orbit and go and create their own solar system where they can be their own moral arbitrators. And so in that sense, there is, for us, as we sit here today, very much east of Eden, a glory deficit in our lives. There is something that we were made for, that we long for, that our hearts and our souls thirst after, that we don't experience in this life because we have a glory deficit. There is a deep ache in us for something more. And the Bible tells us actually that the glory of God is so often revealed in nature and in beauty. And we experience it in music and works of art and great food. There are these moments where actually the glory of God does seem to break into our world. Because after all, if he is infinite, ultimate goodness, then all goodness that we experience in this world is in one sense an expression of him. And so there's these moments when we touch it and we sense it and we taste it, and yet we're left hungering for more. We just want more of whatever that is that we've experienced. These moments in life where we think, this is incredible. This is the reason why we're made. I said sometimes we want to put it in a bottle and keep it in our pocket forever. So we're so desperate for it. East of Eden, we are left for longing. Now, you might not know this, but our church doors out the front there face east. They're facing east. And that's often the way for lots of churches. They are often purpose-built so that their doors face in an eastward direction. They're orientated towards that place. It's as if we're saying, with our doors open towards the east, we're saying, actually, we want to be welcoming the glory that we left as we traveled east out of Eden as humanity. That we want to, in one sense, because we're hungry for it and we're desperate for it, we want to be open to it, to have our doors open for it, to say, Jesus, you're welcome in this place. In Matthew 24, it says that Jesus will return like lightning from the east. And again, the glory will come from the east. This is why we want to keep our doors open to the east, to say, God, we want you to come in. And that goes not just for the physical architecture of our church, but I think as we work our way through this preaching series, very much the emphasis of it is like we want this to be your heart posture within your life as well, that the doors of your life would be always facing eastward with the sense of, I know that I was created for something more, and so I want to be turning and facing my whole life eastward and saying, God, if there is an extent to which I can experience your glory and touch all of the goodness and all of the joy, and instead of settling for the things in life, turning and looking towards him, opening those doors of our heart eastward towards him, except so often in life, instead of in that posture of, God, I just want more of you, we end up endlessly rearranging the dishwasher and tidying the house so that when people come around, it looks like we always live like that. And, walking into a room and forgetting why we're doing it, and This constant cycle of work, sleep, eat, repeat, work, sleep, eat, repeat, work, sleep, eat, repeat, and it goes over. And you can find the glory of God in those places. Absolutely, you can. I'm just saying that so often we get stuck into this mundane cycle where all of a sudden the years flash by and everything in life becomes ordinary and mundane, and you forget the fact that we're east of Eden and that those doors even exist. And they grow old and cobwebby, and when was the last time that you really opened them with a sense of expectation to say, God, I want your glory? Or are they in your life in some senses closed with the ivy growing over them because you don't believe that he's really here? If you've ever stood in that place where you've almost forgotten that those east doors even exist and that the reality of God seems to be distant from you, and it feels like many of the things he did in your life feel like a distant headline in the past, and you've settled into the kind of boring mundaneness of life, routines, week in, week out. If you've ever, which I have, if you've ever lived in that place, then you will know exactly how Ezekiel feels as he stands on the river Kebar in Babylon just before he receives this vision. He's 30 years old when he sees this incredible vision. The exact date, we can work it out from the introduction there, is the 31st of July, 593 BC. And Ezekiel was someone who had trained all of his life to become a priest in the temple. And this had begun at a very young age. But at the age of 25, he would then begin his formal apprenticeship in the temple that he would have completed just before he turned 30. And then by this stage in life, he would have become a priest in the temple. So actually, all of his life and all of his experience is leading up to this point where he's going to become a priest in the temple. Now, really bit of important context about what that is and what that means. So let's rewind a little bit. Ever since humanity left Eden and went east, God was intent on bringing glory back because it is the thing that we need, and he wants what is best for you. He's always been intent on bringing the glory back. It says in Habakkuk that the glory of the Lord will cover the earth as the waters cover the sea. I don't know when was the last time that you looked at the sea, but there's an awful lot of water in it. You think of the extent of it, the depths of the Mariana Trench, the streams and currents, the Gulf, incredible, the coral reefs, the Great Barrier Reef, the extent and size of the ocean, the weight of it, the expanse of it is beyond imagination. And God says one day the glory of the Lord is going to cover the earth like the waters cover the sea. It's coming, but getting to that point is not straightforward. Because the glory of God cannot just simply turn up. Because how can, and I know I've said this before, but anything that is evil cannot stand in the face of infinite goodness. Anything that is selfish cannot stand in the light of infinite grace. If you were infinitely rich, it would also be impossible for you to say, I'm poor, would it not? If you were infinitely tall, imagine that. You could not also be short at the same time. Do you see, when something of infinite nature turns up, nothing of the opposite of it can stand in existence in amongst it all. And so when the glory of the Lord turns up, the weight of it will crush us because we are not of it. Because there is selfishness and there is evil and there is things that are not right in our lives, and anything that is not right will be crushed. You think of that tragic incident when the Titan submersible went down to view the Titanic, and it was not authorized to go to those depths. It had not been, checked or whatever would need to be, not been certified to operate at those kinds of depths because of the way that it was designed. It should not have been in that space, and so it imploded, tragically taking the lives of, I can't remember how many it was, 4 or 5 people. You and I are not able to exist in the place where the glory of the Lord covers the earth like the waters cover the sea because the pressure is too intense and is too much. God's glory coming is not simple. And so God starts this temple system, this tabernacle first of all, and then the temple, where there's this space in the midst of it called the Holy of Holies, where no one was able to go there. It was separated off. And in this space, the Holy of Holies, the glory of the Lord shows up on earth. But no one can go in there, except for the great high priest, who once a year goes in on behalf of all of the people of Israel to atone for their sin. And people say this like it's in the Bible, but it's not actually in the Bible. It's just a Jewish legend that they would tie a rope around the leg of the priest as he went into that space in case he died, so that they could pull the body out. because it was complex going into that space. He'd go through all of these rituals and ceremonial washings and sacrifices and stuff just to walk into that space, and yet still they tie a rope around his ankle. Because as I said, the glory coming is not simple. And so Ezekiel spends all of his life in training for this incredible, beautiful, and terrifying thing. You imagine the excitement that he feels growing as he starts his apprenticeship in the temple. And he might not ever go into the Holy of Holies, but he was going to come close to it. He knows this is the glory that our hearts and our souls long for, and God is bringing it to earth. You imagine this is incredible. He's bringing it to earth, and it's in the next room. And maybe one day, if I play my cards right, and I do really well, I might even get to go in there. I might die, but it would be worth it just to taste and experience it. The excitement that he has, to be near the glory. But in 597 BC, 3 years before this vision happens, Babylonian forces march into Jerusalem and take 7,000 people captive, including Ezekiel. And he's taken away from this temple system, taken away from the glory of God, taken away from everything that he'd been training for, and removed as an exile to Babylon. And it's hard to imagine, isn't it, what that must have felt like for him to have experienced that, to have walked through that, to see his life's work gone, his ambitions and dreams gone, all the training that he'd been doing, the building up to this point, like complete waste of time. And worse, he's violently removed from his own God, because it's specific to this very specific geographical location. Not like for us. He's removed from God. He's removed from his beliefs, his worldview, and he's taken away. And so as we find him at the start of here, chapter 1 of Ezekiel, we find him standing on the banks of the Kebar River in Babylon, and he's 550 miles away from Jerusalem, 550 miles away from home, 550 miles away from the temple, 550 miles away from the glory, and 550 miles away from hope. And I don't know if you've ever felt like you've been in that place, where God was a distant headline in your past. Everything used to be in color, and now it's in black and white. This is exactly how Ezekiel feels as he stands on the banks of the river Kebar, distant from God. So can you imagine his surprise when he looks up and he sees this storm approaching from the north? And it is hard to get your head around imagining exactly what it looks like because it's so complex. But fire, 4 living creatures, wheels within wheels, and atop this a throne that looks like sapphire, and in the middle of this a figure burning like molten metal. And when Ezekiel sees it, he lies face flat on his face, prostrate before God, because he understands that all of a sudden the glory of God is not in the Holy of Holies, it is here on the banks of the river Kebar in Babylon, 550 miles away from where it's supposed to be. And it has come to Ezekiel, who never finished his training, who was never authorized, who never dreamt he'd come close to it, who never thought he'd ever experience it, and yet it is here. And he falls flat on his face for a very good reason. And I just want to dwell on this for a moment because I think this is so important. Imagine that you have a job, maybe as like a surgical nurse, and you're in an operating theatre, doing a very long operation. It's like hours and hours long. So you have a break halfway through, you go outside on your break and you go and get some fresh air outside, and you accidentally, of course, you step on a dog poo. It always happens at the worst moment, doesn't it? You step on a dog poo. So you do all the usual, find some wet grass and the old, swishy swashy movement, find a stick. You're giving it all you can to try and flick it off. And then you go back after your break and you think that you've cleaned it up and it's fine. And the trouble is that sometimes a smell like that, you become accustomed to it, don't you, after a little while? You don't realize that you stink, but everyone else does. And so you go back into the operating theatre, and the consultant who's doing the operation, or surgeon, whoever it is, he looks up and he looks at you and he's like, "Get out." And you've forgotten to change your shoes or put those little blue things over the top. And he's like, "Get out, because you have brought a contaminant into that space that is surgically clean, that is sterilized. And it cannot be in that place because it is a threat to life. It does not belong there. It's a threat to life." Now, the point of that is this: always pick up your dog poo. I'm just joking. That's not really why. The point of this is, like, there are spaces sometimes that you and I cannot walk into because we don't belong there. I know I've said it already before in a few different ways, but I cannot stress it enough that the glory of God that we long for is everything that we long for, and it is incredibly dangerous. Think about that wonderful line. I'm sure I've said this a million times, but it's Susan in Narnia when she speaks to the beaver about Aslan, the lion, and she says, I'd be a bit afraid of meeting a lion. What's he like? Is he safe? And the beaver says, no, he's not safe, but he's good. And so it is with the glory of God. It is not safe for you and I, but it is good. I think in the past, the church was really good at putting the fear of God into people, wasn't it? It was like, you be afraid of God. He will send you to hell unless you give us money at the end. Giving points at the back. And it was like, laid on thick, often in a way that was sometimes superstitious, sometimes manipulative, and like not entirely helpful. But then there's almost like a flip in a pendulum swing, isn't there? Today, and in many of the churches, I think that we would be like and similar to, but there's this extent where, Jesus, he's just one of your mates. He's one of the lads. He's just like you and me. He's a human. He is the friend of sinners, and he loves you. He wants to come close to you and draw near to you and be and of all of that, and of course all of that's true, isn't it? But the danger with a pendulum swing is that we somehow imagine that there was this balance in the middle, isn't there? Which is not entirely true. Is God someone you should be terrified of and afraid of and fearful of? Or is he someone who is your best friend, who loves you to pieces, who would die for you? And I think the answer the Bible gives to that is yes. Yes, he's all of those things. He's all of those things. He is the friend of sinners, but he is also holy, 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 Lord God Almighty. And when Ezekiel sees him, he understands this for multiple reasons. For one thing, the vision that Ezekiel sees, it says it comes from the north. Now, I preached on this passage at a church down in Cornwall a few months ago, and I said, I'm just saying I'm from the north. But that's where the judgment of God comes from the north, and here I am from the north. The judgment of God comes from the north. The Babylonians come from the north, the Assyrians come from the north. Often the judgment of the Lord comes from the north. Has the appearance of burning metal, fire, lightning, all which are symbols of judgment. And after all, Israel are here in exile because of their sin. So he understands this is an intense vision. And then he sees these heavenly beings with these four faces of a lion, an ox, an eagle, and a man. They're the same living creatures that you see in Revelation chapter 4. And they're there with these wings and on these wheels covered in eyes. And those are cherubim. Now, you might, if I say cherubim, you might think of babies with bows and arrows, this kind of cherubs that we see at Valentine's Day. But that's not at all helpful. There's kind of a few different types of spiritual beings. You get your box standard angel, which most people are terrified of, and then at the very top you get your seraphim, the burning ones who are minister at the throne of God, and then in the middle you get the cherubim, and the cherubim's role is to guard the glory of God. So when Adam and Eve are thrown out of the garden and they go east of Eden, it is the cherubim who stand there with their swords flashing backwards and forwards at the entrance. And some of you from Cafe Theology will know this, but in the Holy of Holies, we've got your curtains in the Holy of Holies that separate it from the rest of the temple, tabernacle, and on those curtains embroidered is an image of the cherubim for the exact same reason. They are the ones that guard the glory. And that's not because the glory itself needs guarding. It's not God who needs protection, but it's you who needs protection. And again, Ezekiel would have known this, that there is something incredibly mighty and strong that he is experiencing, seeing in this moment that he should be afraid of. And it's there for his protection. The glory of God is not to be messed with. So the question is this, then why is it not in the Holy of Holies in Jerusalem, but why is it here in Babylon on the river Kebar, where it shouldn't even be in the first place? And we're going to see over the next few weeks in detail exactly why this is. But in essence, this vision is in one sense prophetic of what God is going to do. He's almost saying, I am doing a new thing. No longer will the glory of God be confined to a temple, to the Holy of Holies, but now the glory of God has literally got wheels and it can go anywhere. And it can be anywhere, and it can come to anyone, even to you, Ezekiel, who never finished your training, who's standing on the banks of the River Kebar. It's fulfilled in Jesus, who comes and says in John chapter 1 that he tabernacles amongst the people. He comes as the fulfillment of the temple. He forgives people's sins like the temple was supposed to do. He comes as the Holy of Holies, and all of a sudden the glory of God shows up in a person. And then at Pentecost, which is going to be in a couple of weeks' time, the glory of God falls on the heads of all believers as fire appears on their heads, and the glory comes near. And so you see all of this vision that he sees here is a precursor for the fact that for you, as you sit here in life today, even if you feel 550 miles away from where God is, his glory is present and available to you by the power of the Holy Spirit. In some sense, it is in the room right here, right now, in this moment. And if you really knew how close it was, you too would fall flat on your face in awe and wonder at how incredibly good God is and how incredibly close he is. He is closer than you think. And so I want to say to those of you today who feel burnt out and who are struggling, who feel like you can't cope, who feel overwhelmed, who feel anxious and afraid and struggling with hope, God is here. The glory of God has wheels, and it travels to each and every person who is struggling and hurting, who has been exiled to Babylon in some sense, who is standing 550 miles away from everything that they ever dreamed of. His mercy is more. And he travels the extent of his glory to you, to meet you in this life. I want to share a story as we wrap up. Well, it's quite a long, actually, little section of our podcast. I wanted to share this story particularly because it's almost like a parallel of Ezekiel chapter 1. It's very interesting that it's almost like the same thing happening. But it does happen in the midst of a very difficult story, and so I want to just give you a bit of I don't know what the right word is, but a heads up. And it's the story of, some of you might remember, Natasha. She was a 15-year-old girl who had a severe allergy to sesame seeds. You might remember her story. She ate a product from a pret-a-manger in an airport and then died tragically not long after that. And if this is a story that you're going to struggle to listen to, and it does go into detail, then by all means, please just step out for 10 minutes. No shame at all. It's quite a hard story in many ways. But also, if you are going to struggle with this, maybe it's actually exactly the story that you need to hear. Because it's in these kinds of circumstances where so often the glory of God shows up and he turns up. So let's listen.
Now this is where we come to the really difficult part of this conversation, which is what happened in 2016. Would you mind sort of taking us through the events of that day?
Yeah, I remember it vividly, perhaps unfortunately, but we were going, myself, Natasha, and her best friend Bethany, who was 14 at the time. We were going on just a short trip to the south of France, into Nice, and Bethany was Natasha's best friend. She wanted to show her a world that was different than what she knew here. We got on, basically we were at Heathrow Airport, of course early morning, everybody's hungry. So we popped into a pret-a-manger sandwich chain that I knew really well that was in Heathrow Airport, and the girls looked at what they wanted to eat. I did pick something up, and we examined Natasha's choice, closely, the packaging, what it said. She looked at it closely, as she would routinely on any other day. Nothing different, nothing unusual. We all ate the food within a matter of minutes, and then we got straight on the plane. Natasha sat next to me here, and Bethany by the window, so she could see a view that she'd not seen before. The girls were listening, sharing their, kind of music through their headphones. And sort of quite a way into the journey, about 40 minutes in of a 2-hour flight, Natasha was sort of looked really uncomfortable. And she said to me, Daddy, look, I think I'm having an allergic reaction. And she lifted up her top so I could see her skin. And it was all red, flaming red, like torch fire, with big welts, etc. And she was scratching and rubbing her throat. And she said, Daddy, I'm having difficulty breathing. Let's go to the toilet. basically now, which was only about 10, 12 feet away at the front of the plane, and give me the EpiPen, in other words, inject the EpiPen. Oh my gosh, okay. So I saw this stewardess pass by, said, this is what we're about to do. We got up, and within probably 30 seconds, myself and Natasha were cramped into the toilet that barely fits one person in there. And I pulled her leggings down and I injected her with adrenaline, and I counted to 10 slowly, having memorized the video of how to do it. Never done it before, but I felt very in control, basically. I think that's what I want to say. I didn't think, oh my gosh, this is a nightmare. This is all going to pot. What's happening? I felt this will do it. This is what we've always, believed will work, and the reaction will go into reverse, basically, and we'll be fine. Then, I thought, okay, looking at her like that, and she's not getting better. She's, Daddy, I still can't breathe. Get the second one. Oh my gosh. I ran quickly to the seat, back in 20 seconds, injected her with a second EpiPen. But it didn't seem to have any effect. Now, I'd never seen the effect it should have. I'd never witnessed it on someone else. People rarely do. These moments come few and far between. But I knew it should get better. But then she said, Dad, she started slumping forward and said, Daddy, I can't breathe. Help me. And those were the last words she spoke to me. Took her out of the toilet like that. Put her into the jump seat, which is the little flip-down seat as you walk on the plane, where the cabin crew sit for takeoff. Shouted at the top of my voice for oxygen tank. And we put the mask on. They turned the gas on, the oxygen tank on. I grabbed the tank, I remember, and made sure the flow was maximum flow. I couldn't believe really what was going on, but still in the fight, I must say, very in the fight. And I said, call on the overhead speaker thing for a doctor. They did. One came forward minutes later, and there he was, this young man. He looked like my own son. He turned out to be about mid-20s, and we started CPR immediately, basically, and really strong compressions, mouth to mouth. I kept talking to her really loudly, egging her to come through. You can do it. So again, I remember this strength thing. I've seen you win the races. Yeah. I've seen you do this at school against the odds. You can do it, and constantly drumming that, like repetitive. And by the time we landed, which was quite some time later, Natasha remained unconscious. The paramedics came on board straight away, and there was quite a few of them, and they started to get to work with, again, more chest compressions. I was holding a saline solution that was a drip that was going into her. They were trying to clear her airways. It's just not working. The heart monitor, which the defibrillator showed there was, heart activity. So to me, that kind of, I'm going, that's a good sign. It's a good sign. Yeah. And I remember high-fiving all of the paramedics, all in French, by the way. It's not happening now.
This is not the script.
This is not the script. Yeah. Absolutely not the script. There we were in this horrendous situation. I remember the pilot was standing literally 3 feet in front of me in the doorway, filling the aperture, and he was, full captain gear. He was weeping. Her heart, the monitor just dropped off. Yeah, and so they went at it again and again and again. The CPR.
Nadim says that as someone used to being in control, getting results and doing life on his own terms, this was not supposed to happen. He had no frame of reference for what was taking place in front of him, nor for what happened next.
And suddenly, Natasha's still there, as she was, exactly as I've seen it all along, but everyone else disappears, and the whole vista, everything I can see, totally is made of yellow light, and no one is there except Natasha and then 5 angels. 5 things I'd never seen in my life, which I would call angels because they were human beings, as in terms of long and skinny, from her toes that side to her head on that side, pretty much equidistant across the length of her body, hovering with wings, but all had wings on, all made of monochromatic yellow light, just moving like this, like that, above her. But then I was so taken aback, I remember, from this, and I remember it dawning on me, what the heck? And I immediately went, it's not her time. shouted that aloud, and with this right hand whooshed them away like that. Basically, go, in a very polite way of putting it. In that second, as it were, all went. That light disappeared. They went. Everybody comes back into sharp focus, who's still where they were, but nobody was moving at all. Everybody just had their head down, and were just frozen, basically. And I looked at the heart monitor, and it had flatlined. It'd gone. I realised, God, she's gone. Actually gone.
By his own account, Nadim was not a person interested in faith, but Natasha had been. In fact, she had become a Christian through Bethany's church, the same friend who was with her on the flight.
It took us 5 days to work out how to bring Natasha's body back. 48 hours later, if that, 36 hours later, found myself in church. This was the church that Natasha had been going to for probably 2.5+ years for Friday youth group. Now, not that I was even really aware of it, because as I think I alluded to earlier, I was so wrapped up and tied up with working and everything else. I really didn't pay much attention to things I wasn't interested in, and that was definitely the word church, something I wasn't interested in.
And it was something her friend, who had also been on the flight, was involved with.
Exactly. Yeah, so Natasha's friend Bethany, her father, Adrian Holloway, is a well-known, at the time, pastor of an evangelical church in London. And it's through that connection that Natasha had been going to the church, Everyday Church in Wimbledon, and for Friday sort of youth group, and then gone to New Day, something called New Day, which I'd never heard of either, and didn't pay any attention to either at the time. And it's that church that Natanya and I walked into on that Sunday morning, and I remember I was just like shell-shocked. About 300 people kind of wrapped I would say their love and their care and their compassion around us, and certainly me, as it were. And I was kind of overwhelmed by all these people I didn't know, all these faces, essentially, of all sorts, all the ethnicities, all the ages, essentially, a complete patchwork of society, effectively, wrapping themselves with love and care. And I think I don't know these people. What have I ever done for them? Transactionally. I was thinking, I haven't sold you something. You don't have to. It's not. It's not a swap. This was given to me effectively for free, in effect. And I remember sitting there, and week after week, coming to hear more of the Bible. So really, the New Testament. This was at that time. Things that I'd never picked up the Bible ever in my whole life, just so you know. All those hotels I stayed in around the world, the Bible was often there in that era. That was the time when
the Gideon's Bible in the bedside table.
I said, Gideon, get out. Gideon, go into the cupboard in the drawer, and off he went. That was my relationship with Gideon and the Bible.
There's so often those moments 550 miles away from Babylon where the glory of God shows up and he meets people. And that might not be your experience this morning, and you might be left in that place of wondering, where is he, and still longing for him. But I just wonder, as we finish, whether you will have the courage to open up those east gates once again and open yourself to the possibility that God in his glory has wheels and he wants to come to you. He wants, in this miracle, because you're contaminated, you can't come into that space. And yet the miracle of the cross is that he has forgiven you and made you clean and put on the life of Christ on you so that you are pure and spotless. And so that even as you are in this moment 550 miles away, he will come to you and he will bring his glory to you. And he will manifest the reality of himself in your life. And what is required perhaps is that you would once again open up those east-facing doors, understanding that you are east of Eden, and just call on him. God, would you come? May that be our prayer for our city. God, would you come? Do not pass us by. For our church, God, would you come? Do not pass us by. We are longing for you. We desire you. We thank you that you break in these moments. That story was incredible. Not only did Nadir, that father, go on to go to church, but there was this long court case that you might remember with Pret a Manger, and there's this moment where God just convicts him that he needs to go and forgive the guy who was the CEO of Pret, and there's this meeting where he walks up to him and he goes, I know that you're our father too, and that you understand, shakes his hand, hugs him, and forgives him. Because this is what happens when these doors are open up and God comes flooding into someone's life. It changes absolutely everything. Oh, thank you, Lord. Can we stand? Let's have the band up. Let's have we have got a time of communion now. Let's just have the people forward to serve communion as well and be ready for this. And also our prayer ministry team. If you're on prayer ministry this morning, could you come up and stand in this area over here just to be ready to pray for people? Because I do think that part of what it means to open those east doors in your life and to walk into a sense of the glory of God is to trust the power of the cross over your life. That actually, yes, there is a right fear of the Lord, that we understand that he is holy, 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 God Almighty. But also, thanks to the blood of Jesus, you have the ability to walk into his presence, to know his glory. His mercy is more, and you are forgiven, and you can experience him. And partly what it means to open up those east gates in your life is to take this bread and this wine now with a sense of faith, knowing that as you do it, you prepare a way for him to come into your life. And that right here where you are, maybe in this moment, 550 miles away from where you would expect him to be, he's waiting for you. His glory has wheels. And it is available to you this morning, if only you'll ask. Sometimes I think what we need in the church is a hunger that pushes past our own sense of insecurity and feeling like we're 550 miles away, to understand what has happened in the cross and the resurrection and at Pentecost enough to be able to say, God, in this moment, would your Holy Spirit come? Would as we exalt you, Lord, as the King of all kings and the Lord of all lords, and we fall face down before you this morning, we want to welcome you, Lord. We want to see your glory. We want to taste all of your goodness in our lives.